Gemini, God will show you who's really on your side. You'll have to make a tough decision this weekend. Your heart has always danced with the wind. Curious, compassionate, endlessly generous with your time and energy. You've listened more than you've spoken, even when people assume otherwise, carried laughter into heavy rooms, and created bridges where others saw only walls. But behind your quick wit and bright smile, there's a soul that quietly absorbs everything, every shift in tone, every hidden intention, every silence that lingers too long. And lately, haven't you felt it? The undercurrent? That something or someone isn't quite right, no matter how much you try to explain it away. This weekend, you won't be able to ignore it anymore. The universe is preparing to pull back a veil, to show you who's truly aligned with your spirit, and who's only been orbiting your light for their own gain. It may be uncomfortable, it may hurt, but it will also be clarifying, liberating, necessary. And no, this message isn't meant to scare you. It's here to empower you. Because Gemini, you are not here to dilute yourself for the comfort of others. You are here to live in full alignment with truth. So breathe deep, tune in, and if this resonates already, like this video, share with a friend who may need it, and subscribe for the guidance ahead. Let's begin your journey to clarity. Gate 1, the whisper beneath the noise. Gemini, one of your greatest gifts is your mind's ability to gather, observe, and connect patterns across time and space. You are the messenger of the zodiac, born with antennas finely tuned to both the spoken and the unspoken. And while others might be surprised by the revelations coming this weekend, deep down, you won't be. You've already noticed the subtle shifts, the change in someone's tone, the text left unanswered a bit too long, the way certain people light up only when they need something from you. Your intuition, though often dismissed by your own rational side, has been speaking, whispering, preparing. You've always believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. You offer grace. You ask questions instead of assuming, and you prefer to mend rather than sever. But there comes a moment when the truth refuses to be background noise. It rises, urgent and unavoidable. That moment is now. This weekend, something undeniable will unfold. Someone close, a friend, a lover, a colleague, will reveal who they truly are, not necessarily through confrontation, but through action, silence, or an accidental moment of truth. And when it happens, it will strike a chord so deep you'll feel the echo in your chest. For example, take Elena, a Gemini woman who spent years nurturing a friendship she believed to be mutual. She was the one checking in, remembering birthdays, offering support through every heartbreak. One day, Elena saw a message thread not meant for her, words spoken behind her back that painted her as too much, too nosy, and only useful when she's needed. It broke her, but it also freed her. Or consider James, a Gemini rising with a heart big enough to hold the world. He stayed in a romantic relationship long past its expiration because he believed people could grow. He believed love was meant to stretch. But growth must be mutual. One morning, after yet another emotional dismissal, James stood in the mirror and said aloud, "I deserve more than confusion." That was his turning point. Gemini, you may encounter a similar moment this weekend. It won't be dramatic unless you resist it. It may feel quiet, internal, almost anticlimactic, and yet it will change everything. Because truth does that. It clears the fog. It returns your energy to you. What's happening now isn't betrayal from the universe. It's divine protection. You're being shown what you couldn't or wouldn't see before. And it isn't because you were naive. It's because your heart has always chosen possibility over pessimism. You've looked at people and believed in their higher selves. But now, you're being asked to see their actual selves and to choose accordingly. There's a sacred kind of grief that comes with this. The grief of letting go not of a person, but of a version of them you hoped was real. It's okay to mourn that. Cry if you must. Sit with the loss. But then, rise. Because the truth that's being delivered to you isn't meant to tear you down. It's meant to help you rebuild your inner world on a foundation of authenticity. No more one-sided friendships. No more loving people who only show up halfway. No more being the translator in relationships where the language of respect is foreign to the other. You've been carrying too much, Gemini. The burden of pretending everything is fine when your nervous system has been sounding the alarm for weeks. The weight of wondering whether you're too sensitive when someone ignores your boundaries. The exhaustion of showing up wholeheartedly for people who treat connection like convenience. This weekend, that cycle ends, but only if you let it. There will be a decision to make. It may not require a dramatic exit or confrontation. In fact, the most powerful decisions are often the quietest. It might look like stepping back without explanation, releasing expectations, or finally saying, "No, I won't pretend this doesn't hurt." And yes, you'll be tempted to second-guess yourself. Your mind will want to analyze, rationalize, compromise, but your soul already knows. You've outgrown something or someone, and no amount of mental gymnastics can shrink you back into who you were when that relationship began. Don't rush into action. Let the truth settle. Let the clarity crystallize. But once it does, honor it. Even if it shakes your world, it will ultimately steady your path. Gemini, this is not punishment. This is preparation for deeper friendships, for love that sees you, for work that respects your brilliance, for a life built not on what sounds good, but on what feels true. You're not being asked to become cold or cynical. You're being asked to protect your warmth by no longer offering it to those who stand too far from the fire. So when the truth arrives, and it will, meet it not with fear, but with reverence. It is your compass home. Gate 2, the sacred test of discernment. Gemini, you are known for your duality, not as a flaw, but as a gift. Within you exists the thinker and the feeler, the dreamer and the skeptic, the mirror and the flame. It's this intricate blend that allows you to see things from every angle, to hold contradictions, to adapt without losing your essence. But this very gift can also become a curse when it leads you to doubt your own inner knowing in the face of contradiction. This weekend, your ability to discern will be tested, not in a way of logic and analysis, but in a more sacred, intuitive way. You'll be asked to separate what feels right from what simply looks right. And for a Gemini, whose world often thrives in a realm of thought and communication, this is an invitation to drop beneath the chatter into the quiet wisdom of your heart. Perhaps you've already sensed this, a person who always says the right thing, but whose energy leaves you feeling small, a relationship that checks every box on paper, yet somehow leaves your spirit malnourished, a group of friends who make you laugh, yet never ask how you're truly doing. These are the illusions being stripped away now, not to break your trust, but to rebuild it in alignment with truth. Discernment is not about judging others harshly. It's about honoring your own boundaries, recognizing misalignments, and making decisions that protect your peace. Gemini, you've often given people the maybe when your soul already screamed no. You've stayed in conversations too long, hoping clarity would come from the other side. But clarity comes within, and now it demands your full attention. Let's take Hannah, a Gemini sun who spent years in a romantic relationship that looked ideal to everyone else. Her partner was successful, attentive in public, and always knew what to say. But behind closed doors, Hannah felt emotionally alone. Every time she expressed a need, it was met with intellectual deflection or subtle guilt. "You're overthinking," he'd say. And being a Gemini, she questioned herself, until one day, her therapist asked, "What would you say to your best friend if she described this relationship to you?" That question cracked her illusion. She realized she had been rationalizing neglect in the name of compatibility. Or consider Liam, Gemini Moon, who was part of a tight-knit creative collective. They shared dreams, ideas, opportunities. But over time, he noticed a pattern. His ideas were taken without credit, his boundaries dismissed as too sensitive. When he finally set a limit, the group labeled him difficult. It hurt, but it also awakened him. He realized he had stayed because he feared losing the community. But what he lost instead was his own voice. Choosing to leave wasn't abandonment. It was reclamation. Gemini, what these stories reveal is something you already know. Just because someone understands your words doesn't mean they honor your truth. Just because you've shared history doesn't mean you owe them your future. The art of discernment is learning to trust your inner weather report more than external forecasts. This weekend, Something or someone will challenge that discernment. It might not be obvious. It could be a subtle betrayal, a dismissive comment, or an intuitive nudge you can't ignore. It may be someone asking for a second chance, or someone whose sudden silence tells you more than their words ever did. And here's where your deeper work begins. You must resist the urge to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You must let go of the need to be liked by those who drain you. You must allow certain doors to close without trying to hold them open just in case. Because Gemini, your energy is sacred. Your joy is a frequency. And the more you give away to people who don't value it, the further you drift from your own alignment. This weekend's decision is not about drama. It's about direction. Which way are you facing? Toward your truth or away from it? The universe isn't asking you to burn bridges recklessly. It's asking you to cross the bridge of self-trust, one step at a time. And each time you do, the path ahead becomes clearer. You begin to notice who energizes you and who exhausts you, who sees you and who merely uses you, who roots for you and who competes with your joy. The shift that happens after you make the right decision may feel quiet at first. There may be no applause, no validation, no grand gesture, but the silence that follows will be filled with peace. You'll sleep better. You'll feel lighter. You'll begin to recognize how much of your anxiety was not yours to carry, but a byproduct of maintaining relationships built on false peace. And then the real magic begins. As you release the connections that confuse you, you create space for ones that clarify you. As you stop performing for acceptance, you become magnetic to authenticity. As you choose solitude over shallow company, you attract the kind of intimacy that doesn't require you to fracture yourself to fit. Gemini, the difficult decision you must make this weekend is not a punishment. It's a portal. Walk through it, and you'll discover the next chapter of your life has been waiting for you to choose yourself first. Gate 3, the alchemy of loss. Gemini, you're entering a threshold where endings are no longer simply moments of grief, but sacred beginnings in disguise. You've spent so much of your life gathering ideas, relationships, conversations, potential. You've loved connecting dots, nurturing connections, seeing the possible in what others abandoned. But this weekend, something will shift. You will begin to see that not everything is meant to be carried forward. Loss, especially when unexpected or abrupt, can feel like a collapse. But for you, Gemini, this is the beginning of your alchemical journey. The sacred process where what was once weight becomes light, where confusion gives way to clarity, and where heartbreak is a doorway to deeper self-respect. Let's go deeper. When a truth is revealed, be it betrayal, apathy, or misalignment, it doesn't just leave a void. It also invites you to see what part of yourself has been hiding inside that dynamic. Was it the part of you that wanted to be liked at any cost? The one who feared being alone? The part that believed your value was tied to your usefulness? These parts aren't shameful. They're simply wounded. And now, they're being called home. Take Ruben, a Gemini with a history of emotional shape-shifting. In every relationship, he became what the other person needed. Funny, supportive, easygoing. Yet he often felt like no one truly knew him. When a friend finally ghosted him after years of closeness, Ruben spiraled. But in the quiet aftermath, he journaled a truth that changed him. Maybe I've been more loyal to their comfort than to my own truth. That insight was his alchemy. The friend didn't just leave. He revealed where Ruben needed to return to himself. Or consider Nadia, Gemini moon, who poured herself into her spiritual community. She taught, supported, showed up, but when she faced a personal crisis, her inbox remained silent. No prayers, no check-ins, just absence. It hurt deeply, but it also uncovered where she'd been overgiving in hopes of feeling needed. Once she allowed herself to grieve the illusion, she discovered a deeper truth. She had always belonged to herself. Gemini, this weekend, you might find yourself standing in that same emotional terrain. The mask of someone you trusted may slip. The silence of someone you relied on may be louder than expected. But instead of asking, why did they do this to me? Ask, what part of me is being asked to rise? Because this isn't just about seeing others clearly. It's about seeing yourself clearly in their reflection. And when you do, you'll find something surprising. Strength you forgot you had. You may feel the urge to fill the empty space left behind. Distract yourself. Make new plans. Reach out to others to confirm your worth. Resist that urge. Sit with the empty. Let it echo. Let it teach you. Because that space, it isn't emptiness. It's the womb of your rebirth. So much of your life, Gemini, has been about movement. But your greatest transformation comes not when you move faster, but when you pause long enough to feel what's real, to let the waves of realization wash through you, clean you, and finally release you from emotional patterns that no longer serve your soul's evolution. It will feel strange at first, to not reach out, to not fix, to not explain, but you'll begin to notice something. The more you stay grounded in your own center, the more clearly you'll see who truly meets you there. This is the alchemy of loss. Realizing that what you thought was the end is actually a recalibration, that the relationship which fell apart wasn't your failure. It was your graduation, that the people walking away weren't your soul tribe after all. They were the final test before you stepped into alignment. And here's the deeper truth. The more honest you become about what hurts, the more powerful you become in choosing what heals. That's the shift happening now. You are no longer the version of yourself who accepts half-hearted love, one-sided efforts, or emotionally confusing dynamics. You are being reborn to the fire of revelation. And that fire, it isn't burning you, it's refining you. When the dust settles, you'll begin to feel it. The subtle return of your own joy. The sacred quiet where anxiety used to live. The surprising smile that rises not from external approval, but from internal peace. That's how you'll know the alchemy is working. So yes, grieve what's falling away, but also celebrate what's emerging. Because you're not just losing people. You're shedding outdated versions of yourself that needed their validation. The people who remain, the ones who call, who show up, who ask how you are, these are the relationships that will nourish your next chapter. You'll find they require no performance, no translation, no shrinking. They meet you in truth, because you've chosen to live in truth. Gemini, this weekend's revelation may shake your emotional foundation, but trust that it's clearing the ground for something truer, deeper, and far more aligned. Let go of what's leaving, not because it wasn't real, but because it's no longer aligned with where your soul is going. Gate 4, rebuilding in the image of truth. Gemini, after the storm comes a stillness, not just outside you, but within you. You walk to the revelation. Allow the truth to do its quiet, powerful work. Now, you're being asked a new question. What does it look like to live in full alignment with what you now know? It's tempting, after a betrayal or emotional reckoning, to armor up, to become harder, colder, more skeptical. But your healing doesn't require you to change who you are. It asks you to return to who you've always been, before the world taught you to overextend yourself for love. Before you believed you had to earn connection through effort, intelligence, or performance. Before you thought your worth depended on how useful you were to others. Now that the veil is lifted, you can finally begin to rebuild. Not reactively, not urgently, but intentionally. This part of the journey is where Gemini's brilliance shines most. You are, at your core, an architect of new ways of thinking. Your mind was never meant to dwell in loops of regret. It was meant to be a channel for vision, for reinvention, for freedom. And that freedom begins by asking, what kind of life do I want to say yes to now? Let's take Clara, a Gemini sun with a heart like a kaleidoscope, always shifting, always seeing beauty in chaos. After ending a long friendship that had become emotionally manipulative, Clara spent weeks in grief. But one morning, she sat down and listed all the things she wanted in her new connections. Emotional availability, mutual care, truth without cruelty, joy without obligation. She kept that list near her phone and returned to it each time an old energy tried to re-enter. I don't need to punish anyone, she told herself. I just need to protect my peace. And she did. Or think of Theo, Gemini rising, who had always blurred his boundaries in the workplace, overworking to earn approval. After a painful falling out with a manager who took credit for his work, Theo didn't just look for a new job. He restructured how he operated. He started valuing rest. He stopped over-explaining. He no longer said yes to things that made his gut twist. I used to think being adaptable was my strength, he said. But it turns out Knowing when not to adapt is the deeper power. Gemini, your adaptability is sacred, but it's not meant to serve anyone who asks for it. It's meant to serve you. Your twin nature isn't a weakness. It's a compass. One twin sees the world with wonder, the other with discernment. And when both are in balance, you're unstoppable. Now is the time to bring those twins back into alignment, not through overthinking, but through embodiment. What does that mean? It means no longer tolerating small lies for the sake of keeping the peace. It means honoring your energetic yes and your sacred no. It means creating emotional boundaries not to shut others out, but to allow only those who truly see and respect you to enter. And this doesn't have to look like walls. For Gemini, it often looks like clarity in language. You can simply say, I need space to process. I don't feel seen in this conversation. I'm not available to carry this dynamic anymore. Simple truths. No apology. No anger. Just sovereignty. There will be tests, of course. People may question your changes. They might say you're being distant, cold, or difficult. But that's only because they were once fed by your emotional labor. And now, you're feeding yourself first. And here's what will surprise you. The more you root into your truth, the less lonely you'll feel. You'll begin to attract people who resonate with the frequency of your healed energy. People who don't need you to perform. People who don't shrink in the face of your intelligence or emotional complexity. People who mirror your growth. Rebuilding after relational revelation isn't about starting from scratch. It's about filtering through what remains. Who calls? Who listens? Who honors your new boundaries without being threatened by them? These are your people. Even if it's just one or two, that's enough. Quality over quantity has never been more important. Gemini, you're being offered a rare opportunity to design your relational landscape not out of habit, but out of deep awareness. You're no longer choosing from fear of being alone. You're choosing from alignment with your future. And the more you do this, the more you'll feel yourself returning fully, unapologetically to your essence. That part of you that is playful, poetic, curious, and emotionally alive. That version of you that doesn't contort for belonging, that laughs freely, that writes at midnight, that asks questions no one else thinks to ask, that holds space for paradox, and feels at peace inside it. Because true relationships, whether romantic, platonic, or professional, don't ask you to dim your light. They adjust to your brilliance. And now, your light is too clear to go unnoticed. Gemini, this weekend may have shaken your old world, but in its place, you now have the rare chance to build a new one, brighter, stronger, rooted in truth, not perfection, not performance, just presence. So take a breath, gather your pieces, choose what stays, and let everything else return to dust. Gate 5, choosing yourself without guilt. Gemini, now that the veil has been lifted, the grief witnessed, and the inner ground reclaimed, a new question arises, not from pain, but from empowerment. What would it look like to live without betraying yourself again? This weekend has shown you what's real. And in that truth, you've begun to understand something profound. The love you were waiting for from others was always an invitation to return to your own. The respect you longed to receive was a mirror, asking if you were willing to offer to yourself first. Now you're standing at the edge of a threshold, not of letting go, but of claiming. This is not the season for people-pleasing, explanation, or second-guessing. This is the season where you choose yourself. Unequivocally, loudly, quietly, fiercely, softly, but most importantly, consistently. You spent years being the bridge, the one who softened conflict, who translated miscommunication, who filled in silence with stories, who made excuses for behavior that hurt you simply because you saw potential. But choosing potential over pattern is how you abandoned yourself. And now, Gemini, the lesson is clear. Pattern is the prophecy. Believe it when you see it the first time. Take Alyssa, a Gemini moon who had a lifelong habit of downplaying her own needs. She thought boundaries meant walls and that silence was a sign of peace. But after a series of draining relationships, where she gave everything and received breadcrumbs, she decided to do something radical. She stopped explaining. When someone crossed her boundary, she calmly said, "That doesn't work for me." No justification, no apology, The first time she did it, her body trembled, but afterward, she felt a kind of peace she hadn't known before. The peace of not abandoning herself. Or reflect on Ben, Gemini sun and Mercury dominant, who had always been the charming fixer. He could talk his way into or out of anything. But after a painful breakup where he once again took more responsibility than was his, he sat down and wrote a letter, not to his ex, but to himself. "I forgive you," he wrote, "for always trying to make it work when your heart was breaking." That act of self-forgiveness was a true turning point, not for his love life, but for his identity. He finally believed that choosing himself wasn't selfish. It was spiritual. Gemini, this weekend has been a cosmic reset, a divine checkpoint. And while the revelations may have come from others, the real invitation has always been about your relationship to yourself. What are you willing to no longer tolerate? Not because you hate them, but because you love you. Because here's the truth. People may not like the new boundaries you set. They might miss the version of you who said yes too quickly, who always responded, who dimmed your needs so others could shine brighter. But that version of you is surviving. This one is thriving. And when you choose yourself without guilt, you change your vibration entirely. You stop chasing and start attracting. You stop explaining and start embodying. You stop waiting for validation and start walking as a permission slip you've been seeking. Does it get lonely? At first, yes. You may feel a void where the noise used to be. The constant texting, the daily drama, the need to check how others are doing or what they think of you. But over time, that silence becomes sanctuary. That solitude becomes sovereignty. That space becomes sacred. You begin to see how much of your old identity was built in reaction to others. And now, you get to build in response to truth. This doesn't mean your heart closes. Quite the opposite. Your heart opens wider, but now with discernment. Now your love isn't desperate. It's devotional. It's not poured out just because someone smiles at you. It's offered where it's respected. And in this offering, you become magnetic to relationships that are balanced, nourishing, reciprocal. Because Gemini, your mind might lead with curiosity, but your soul leads with clarity. And clarity is the most loving thing you can offer yourself now. So what does it mean to choose yourself? It means walking away even when they want you to stay, but only on their terms. It means saying this isn't enough without a footnote of justification. It means letting people be disappointed and letting that not define you. It means embracing your own company like a sacred guest who finally came home. It means becoming more committed to your peace than to anyone's perception of you. You're not here to prove your worth. You're here to embody it. You're not here to earn love. You're here to remember that love, real love, starts within. This weekend, someone may come back with an apology, with a justification, with a subtle pull to return to the old dance. You'll be tempted because comfort is seductive. But don't forget, comfort isn't the same as care. And familiarity isn't the same as alignment. You've already outgrown what they're offering. And no matter how sweet it sounds now, you know how heavy it felt before. This is your cue, Gemini, to protect your peace without guilt, to decline invitations that cost your energy, to pause before responding, especially when your nervous system says, wait, to forgive, yes, but without forgetting who you become through this journey. You're not hard to love. You're hard to manipulate now, and that's a sacred difference. So hold your head high. Speak gently with yourself. Choose you, not once, but over and over until it no longer feels like a rebellion, but a return. Conclusion, when clarity becomes liberation. Gemini, you've walked through the fire. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but the silent, soul-forging kind. The kind of transformation that begins in whispers, a strange feeling in your chest, a pause before a reply, a subtle awareness that something, someone, isn't as aligned as it once seemed. You followed those whispers through revelation, through grief, through release. And now here you are, still standing, still breathing, but lighter. This journey hasn't been about blaming others. It's been about reclaiming yourself. Every time you chose to feel instead of flee, every time you said no when your old self would have said yes, every time you paused instead of performed, you built something sacred, self-trust. The Gemini within you, the seeker, the lover of ideas, the soul who holds paradox with grace, is no longer at the mercy of confusion. You no longer need to be everything to everyone just to feel safe. You don't have to explain your worth. You only have to embody it. Yes, some ties had to be cut. Some truths had to sting. But what remains now is real, pure, unshakable. And as you look ahead, know this. The people, opportunities, and love that are meant for this new version of you are already on their way. Your healing isn't the end. It's the foundation. So continue listening to your intuition. It never lied to you. Continue choosing yourself, not as a last resort, but as your sacred default. Continue honoring your truth, even when it makes others uncomfortable. Because in doing so, you give the world the permission to meet you in authenticity. If this journey has stirred something within you, if you feel seen, heard, validated, leave a comment below. Your voice matters. Your experience might just be the light that helps another Gemini walk their own path with a little more clarity. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel. The journey doesn't end here.